Well, welcome back to the One Big Thing podcast. I am your host, Steve Campbell. Excited to have you with me, whether this is your first listen or your repeat listener of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Um, Sourcing guests is always, it's a fun, exciting adventure because you never know who your next guests are going to be. And I usually try to line guests up a couple of shows in advance. That way we're not running on empty. And I always lean on previous guests to ask them who they know that I should know. And it's always fun when they recommend somebody. So today you're going to hear from Yonasan Goldson. He is actually a referral, a friend, a confidant of JC Glick, who is the only repeat guest that I've ever had on this show. JC is a 20-year Army veteran and Ranger and just has an incredible story. We spent over 2 hours recording podcasts about honor in life and respect and leadership. And anybody that he refers, I know is cut from the same cloth, has the same outlook on life, vision, understanding of people and who we are. And so when he came to me and said, you know what, you have to interview Yonasan, I wanted to schedule some time with Yonasan himself for him and I to talk, give him a feel for the show. So if you'll help me welcome to the One Big Thing podcast, Yonasan Goldson. Yonasan, do you want to take a minute or two here at the beginning for my listeners that may not know who you are to give us a high level overview of kind of who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks so much, Steve, and I certainly share your admiration for JC. The sages teach us there are three crowns: the crown of kingship, of priesthood, and of scholarship. But they say there's one crown that surpasses them all, and that's the crown of a good name.
Hmm.
And you were not the only podcast host to whom JC referred me, and all three of you had the same reaction. If JC refers you, we want to have you on. I would like people to think of me the way they think of JC. It's good to have people in our lives that set that model for us. So
Absolutely.
thank you. As for me, I graduated college with a degree in English, went hitchhiking across the country and backpacking across Europe, and ended up in Israel, where I connected with my Jewish roots. Spent 9 years studying the ancient wisdom of my people, became a rabbi, and set off on my career teaching. I taught high school for a year in Budapest, Hungary, 2 years in Atlanta, Georgia, and 20 years in St. Louis, where I live now. And when I retired from teaching in 2016, I wanted to take the universal values of Judaism and use them to help professionals recognize how to create a more ethical culture, a more vibrant and healthy work culture. And so my goal is to work with professionals to help them create that ethical culture that earns trust, sparks initiative, and drives productivity.
Yeah, and I love that. As I was doing a little bit of due diligence, because I like to kind of understand much as my guests without kind of stealing their thunder or trying to figure out like I know their story. You had a fascinating background. Zach Wolchuk was a previous guest of my show. He is in his late 20s, early 30s, and talked about when he went back to Israel as part of his Jewish roots and what he learned. And he is a part of the Dallas Cowboys media. And when he came back and shared the stories of what he encountered, you had people that are in a secular field that wanted him to take time on the radio to talk about what he had learned going back to Israel and visiting these places that he learned about as a boy. And so I think it's exciting to have your background as a rabbi to be on this show. That's what I love about this show is it's not a faith-based podcast, even though faith is the biggest part of my life. I wanted to have a medium and a platform to be able to connect with people regardless of where they are, as we can all learn from each other and hear of our experiences that make us humans and what we've learned along the way. And especially when you talk about ethics, a lot of our guests, if you are an advocate or championing Yonasan on the show, I built the One Big Thing to really help mostly encourage and inspire parents, those that are married in their 30s and 40s that are in the very similar season that I'm in, raising kids, raising families, trying to really figure out adulthood and who they are as people, making decisions. Am I making the right decisions? And there's so many podcasts that are out there that are leadership focused or self-improvement, self-help that can say things like just be better, try harder, do more. But when you feel like you're giving all that you are as a dad or as a mom or as a parent or in your business, you're pushing as hard as you can and it still feels like something's missing or something's off. What I love about this show is that many times it's those human virtues that bring us together of honor, of respect, of loyalty, of dignity. And I think for somebody like you to go into corporations and businesses and try to teach ethics, which, if the world has ever needed strong ethics and what we stand for and what we believe in this mishmash of so much inundation and sensationalism, I think that there's a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds that are looking for truth, looking for to believe in something that's bigger than themselves, looking for a guiding light. And maybe that's what ethics comes down to. So I would love to kind of go back as far as you're willing to for our guests that might be a little bit curious like I am, as to what this journey into a life of ethics has been like, what tapping into your Jewish roots have been like, and how did we kind of get to where we are today?
Yeah, well, that was almost a mic drop moment there. So regroup a little bit. I actually have given a TED talk where I do lay out my story. But when I was in college, I was motivated to study English literature because I love the power of story. Um, Lessons taught through stories are much more impactful than simply telling the lesson, teaching the lesson. We're wired that way. And
Mm-hmm.
not just the story for entertainment, but to actually think, what is the underlying lesson? What are the motivations? What are the conflicts? And when I graduated, I had this passion to tell stories, to teach lessons, but I led a pretty sheltered life, grew up in a comfortable upper middle class home. We weren't rich by any means, but I didn't feel like I really had a compelling message of my own. I didn't feel like I had stories of my own. And I thought what I really need to do is I need to put myself in a situation where I am going to face the unknown and the unexpected on a daily basis. And the idea that coalesced in my mind, much to my parents' chagrin, was to take a hitchhiking trip across the United States. And I used a tactic that I recommend. We're often afraid to do the things that we know we should do or we feel we ought to do. That's certainly what ethical conflict is all about. But one of the tactics I teach is to fight fear with fear. And I ended up telling everybody I knew what I was going to be doing. So that my first day out, when I woke up in a campground in Albuquerque, New Mexico, filled with panic, what have I gotten myself into? How did I ever come up with this wacky idea? I need to get right back on the train and go back home. And I contemplated, I reflected, what would it feel like to face the humiliation of slinking back and confessing that I'd given up after one day, that I'd chickened out on this grand adventure that I'd planned for myself. That gave me the inner strength to carry on, to start my adventure. And I learned so much. I learned patience, not enough, but I learned patience.
Mm.
I learned the power of listening, because very often people pick you up. How do you pay for a ride when you're a hitchhiker? By listening to people. They like to talk. There's the stranger on a train phenomenon. We tell secrets to people that we know we're never going to see again. And I had people unburden their souls to me. They told me, I've never told this to anyone, not my wife, not my children, not my best friend. The power of listening is so critical, and it's so increasingly rare in our society. We have to fill up every bit of air and air time, air space with just saying, with just making noise. We can't sit, we can't reflect. We don't give ourselves time to contemplate, to listen, to get to know other people, which helps us get to know ourselves. And after
I feel
half a year,
like
yeah,
I feel like as the host, I get to see you. You have a very calming, soothing way about you that I'm going to be honest. If I saw you on a train, I'd probably pour my heart out to you too. You just have that way about you. And I want to ask you a question because it's fascinating. And normally I apologize. I give guests a lot of time at the beginning to share, but I think you just touched on something that for listeners is kind of what I got into in an episode with Christian Ponder, who had the ability to play quarterback in the NFL. And he had talked about growing up with insecurity and feeling of fear. And yet here he was as the face of a franchise for the Minnesota Vikings. And you would typically think charismatic, outgoing, alpha male as a quarterback, and he dealt with insecurity. What he and I talked about on the show that's especially hard for, I think, people my age with the inundation of social media is mental health, and the feeling of struggle has almost been monopolized in a way to almost, I'm struggling too, everybody look at me, versus where years ago when you had private conversations on a train or in a truck with a passenger, like there wasn't technology constantly influencing you on what you should feel or victimhood or it's wrong to be successful. You were able to just talk with a stranger and share things that were good for the human soul to get off your chest. But I feel like what's so hard now is everybody's doing that so often that you don't know what's real, and you don't know the amount of care to give to somebody, because there's people that are oversharing all the time things that they're going through, and everyone's acting like the world is ending every single day, and that can't be happening. But it's just we're not learning how to deal with our emotions. So as you share kind of more of your story, I think it's just fascinating for me to listen to you, that we all want to be caring human beings and love our brothers, love our sisters, love our communities where we live. But it's never been hard, and people have never made it harder to love them. That's what I think is challenging too, because everything is so in your face and everyone's so opinionated and everybody is so championing this and championing that. And I'm all for standing up for things, but people have made it hard to want to do life in community with them. And so that's a battle that JC and I talked about, is like, how do you show honor to individuals that are just dishonorable? And how do you guard yourself from that? So sorry, my brain is going a mile a minute as you're talking about something that I think is so at the root of who we are as human beings, which is the honest desire to make a human connection with another person who has never walked a mile in our shoe, but is willing to listen to us with empathy and understand that they may not fully understand what we've been through, but they just want to listen. You've had the opportunity that sparked kind of this journey for you. And I think it would be great to hear just what you've been learning going through this about the human condition, and not like, hey, set us all straight and help us understand what's really important, but just as you've gone through this years of self-discovery and being a human being and in ethics, like, just, I guess, keep sharing your story. But I am very curious to hear where this has all kind of led you today. Let's take a quick break to hear a word from your sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Seed Planning Group. If you're looking for a life-giving experience working with a financial planner, then Seed is here for you. Seed is a fee-only financial planning firm with a fiduciary obligation to put your best interests first. If your goal is financial freedom and independence without sales, products, or really glorified salespeople, then check out Seed Planning Group today. You can visit www.seedpg.com. That's www.seedpg.com. And the best part, you can schedule a free consultation to find out if their fee-only planners and their process are right for you.
I mean, you made so many points there, Steve, that I'm already imagining we could talk for 3 hours and not run out of material. But one thing you said really resonated, that we're still in the aftermath of COVID, and as we were going through it, I felt that one of the real silver linings was kind of exactly what we're doing right now. We were so isolated, and we tried to compensate for that by creating new connections over Zoom, over with people that we never would have come in contact with. I have a number of people, a significant number of people in my life that I consider very, very close acquaintances. I use the word friend very sparingly, but very close acquaintances that I've never met in person. And when we have that actual physical proximity, we feel a natural closeness that sometimes allows us to be superficial in the things we talk about. When we're at a distance, the only thing connecting us is the content and the substance of our conversation. And so, ironically, the distance that COVID created in many ways, I think, brought us closer together. And you actually have communities of people living in all parts of the world that share this mutual commitment to all the values that you just described: empathy, depth of connection, um, commitment, values. It's a wonderful and unexpected benefit of what was a really horrific episode. And and in the same way, since October 7th, I lived in Israel. I'm Jewish. I have a daughter who lives there. I had a son who was on the Lebanon border, who was recalled on October 8th. Um, Jews around the world have become much closer, much more committed to one another. The issues that were dividing us terribly suddenly became irrelevant because people who want to kill
Hmm.
us don't care about our political beliefs. And what we as human beings really need to focus on, you want a lesson. This is I think one big lesson, that we need to not wait for crisis to force us to come together. We need to take advantage of our tremendous good fortune. We live in a world with so much abundance. People are living longer than ever. People are living quality of life better than ever even imagined. People have technology to provide us with opportunities that never existed before. We need to take advantage of those blessings and use them to create a more cohesive society, not look for reasons to be unhappy, to have complaints, to find fault with others, and divide ourselves and cut ourselves off from each other.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about ethics to the listeners of this show, myself, grounded enough that we're not talking about should I kill somebody, should I not? It's more of there's two sides to a coin that could easily be flipped one way or another. That you have to constantly guard your heart and mind. That pride and humility, for example, if you're not careful, when praise comes, pride can kick in because, of course, I crushed that episode. Of course, that went well. Versus this constant desire to be humble, which is like, how do you be humble when self humility can come off, as being overdone? And so I think from my understanding of ethics in your journey, I think we're all trying to navigate very small decisions. It's and go down a path of constant self correction and self diagnosis and where did those thoughts come from? Because you're dealing with you know life and technology, and it's both a blessing and a curse. If you are not careful, you can find yourself going down rabbit holes of information that technology will keep feeding you what it is you're looking for, which will give you a viewpoint of this world that is potentially dark or twisted. But the opposite is true. If you are someone who is following Yonasan, which I would highly encourage everyone to do on LinkedIn and on social media, to be challenged by kind of the thought points that he has. If you begin to seek out, resources like Yonasan, and technology understands that that's what you're interested in, it will suggest other people that you should follow and other resources that you can align yourself with the truth seekers or people that desire intimacy and connectivity. And all of a sudden, you can go from feeling isolated and alone because of what you've been feeding yourself to realizing, wow, there are more people that, not that I'm right or someone else is wrong, but kind of see things. I don't have all the answers, but at least I'm on the right path now with this group of people that are always trying to figure out what's next and how do we learn from, disaster and life and catastrophe and crisis and get better from it, not just move on to the next story or click the next link, but like, what do I do? Like, how do I make sense? And that's I think the dilemma too, as well. I can't remember who I talked about it on the show, but you need to understand, like, controlling what you can control and letting go of what you can't. That's something we talk about as people all the time. I cannot control what happens in the Middle East, but I can care and I can look deeply enough. I'm not Jewish, but I can look deeply enough at what is happening and say, God, I couldn't imagine my children and my wife being in a situation like that. Like, what would I do? In like stopping and pausing in developing a sense of reflection. And I think If technology has done really anything, it's robbed us the ability to reflect and to think about our thoughts and to reflect on life. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for journaling. And sometimes you got to get extreme. Christian talked about getting a desktop computer and getting a phone that's plugged into, the ground and not having a cell phone all the time. I think there is this kind of group of people that are in their 30s and 40s that are trying to reestablish life and community within their families by using technology for what it can be used, but not allowing technology and video games and iPads and tablets to parent your children because you don't know how to, or you're struggling to, and allowing technology to overtake your marriage, like almost going back to a way of life that was through storytelling and reflections. And so I don't know with what level of work you do working with businesses or organizations, but when you try to establish ethics in what we stand for, in what you work with, like what has been the lessons that you've walked away with, or the things that you would encourage somebody who's maybe feeling the way that I'm feeling, which is like, what do I do with everything that's happening in the world around me to make sense of things that really just don't make sense?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a tall order. And there are a couple of different ways I approach it, but you've mentioned in our conversation so far ethics and humility. I have an acronym, ethics, that describes the 6 essential qualities of an ethical leader, an ethical person. The E is empathy. The T is trustworthiness. The H is humility. The I is inquisitiveness. The C is courage. And the S is self-discipline. I have a hour, 2 hour, 4 hour training or weekend training to show how we can develop these qualities in ourselves to become more ethical people. It's an outlook. It's a way of approaching the world. Um, I go back to a couple of thousand years ago when there were two great schools of Jewish study, the House of Hillel and the House of Shammai. And they had very different approaches to Jewish philosophy, Jewish law. And history says that when they debated in the study hall, they argued with such passion, it was as if they fought with swords and spears. But it was never personal. And when they left the study hall, they were good friends. They had tremendous respect for each other because each one recognized the intellectual integrity of the other. Each one was willing to listen, to understand, and to consider maybe there's another way of looking at this. Or I shouldn't even say it that way. There is definitely another way of looking at it. I need to consider all the other ways. This is what we miss so much. We talk about diversity. And diversity is a fundamental Jewish value. We want people who think differently. We want people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, different ways of approaching ideas. Because nobody can see the whole picture. We all look at a piece of it. And they say the answer is almost always in the room. Because when you get enough people together who are looking things in different ways and they engage with each other and they listen to each other and learn from each other, you end up with a holistic picture coming together. Together we can see more of reality. We can see more clearly. We can come away with a better sense of the reality, the problems we face, and the potential solutions for solving those problems. So when you said, find people of quality, follow people of quality, and see who their connections are, and then we start to build a community. And because of the technology we have, those communities don't have to be limited to one place. They can be all over the world. The issue is, are we making technology our servant, or are we becoming servants of technology? And the draw is enormous. Since they started these these Instagram Reels and YouTube Reels, the algorithm has figured out exactly what I like to watch. And
Hmm.
they are insightful, clever, meaningful sound bites. But ultimately, that's all they are. They're just sound bites. And you scroll through them one after the next and the next, and a half an hour can disappear from your life. And you can convince yourself, I can convince myself that I was actually doing something of value because each one of these little clips had value. And yet you put them all together. What do I take away from that? What have I gained? How am I a better person now? How am I more informed? It's so seductive. And it's one thing to say I'm going to take 10 minutes or 5 minutes and just give myself time to unwind doing this. And it's another to lose whole swaths of time because we just get sucked into it.
Hey everyone, Steve Campbell. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If it's made an impact on you, I would love to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. But I would also love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review. Your ratings and review help other listeners know that this show is worth their time. So thank you so much for tuning into The One Big Thing, and let's enjoy the rest of the episode. Well, and that was something that we talked about, again, Christian and I, because that episode was just one more before this with Christian Ponders I had mentioned. But even Dr. Suzanne Thompson talked about just creating space in her life in her episode to have 25 minutes that's uninterrupted, that has a timer, that allows her to think about the 3 things that she needs to accomplish today to make it be a success. And, she talked about the fact that, I'm 37. She probably 15, 20 years on me, but we had talked about the fact that, in her life, she can't have a phone right next to her while she does it because it's so easy to hear the ping or the vibrate in her sacred 25 minutes. And the next thing you know, she's picking it up to check it, and it's a notification, it's an email. And so I think there's also, this quest. I had read in a book years ago that they had studied narcissism on college campuses in the 1950s compared to the early 2000s. So basically, they had interviewed students from 1,000 students, polled them, and how important they thought they were in 1950 on a scale of 0 to 10. And in 1950, maybe 1 or 2 is the average score of level of importance. Of the world revolves around me, I'm an important person. When they did the same study in 2000, it was overwhelmingly above 90% of college students thought that they were important. And what they had talked about is over years with the marketingization of commercialism, you used to be able to walk into a jeans store and there was 2 choices. And you would pick one of the 2 choices. And then they talked about now you have all these companies and all these brands that are all promoting it, and it's overwhelming. And you go into a store. And so you have younger people that are told, and they believe themselves that they're important, walking into us and people of destiny, and that they're going to do things and change the world. And this is what they were told by guidance counselors and teachers and their parents. And I believe that there's truth in a lot of that when applied correctly. But you had young people that were told and began to believe them themselves that they were important. And what happened is when you introduced more choices, they didn't know how to choose because they were constantly battling making a wrong decision, which was going to derail what they had been told was going to be their life. And so they noticed that not only did the level of narcissism go up, but the level of depression was also went up as well. There was more depressed young people that were suicidal. And it was because they didn't know how to make choices. They didn't know how to choose. They didn't know, did the train leave the depot? And I think that's maybe a little bit of what we're kind of all dealing with today, which is when there's a world of resources that are available to you, how to be the best person, how to be the best parent, how to strengthen your marriage, how to strengthen your workplace culture. There are so many resources. But sometimes just the simple act of having technology be in its place is the greatest resource or choice that you can make, because you can search after a world of resources. But if if you're struggling as a parent to raise your children, and there's a book that tries to tell you the 10 ways to be a better parent, but when you're with your child, you're constantly staring at your cell phone while they're trying to engage with you, then the clearest answer in the room is to put your phone down. You can read all the books that you want. And so it is hard because it is addictive. And I don't know that anybody would really want to raise their hand and say they're addicted to technology, but I guess the easiest way to answer that is When you don't have a thought going in your head, when you don't have something that is taking your attention, what is the very first thing that you do? If the very first thing that you do when there's not a thought coming to your mind is to reach for your cell phone and check it, you're probably addicted to technology because you are looking for something to fill the void that is now there. Whether it's a tweet, whether it's a reel, whether it's a YouTube short, whether it's a provocative post, you are looking for something to grab your attention because there has been a culture that has been built to every 8 seconds get your attention, to refocus, to rethink, to redo something. And we've just kind of lost the ability to just be bored. We've lost the ability to just sit and contemplate. And so now I guess my fear is that even in my own life personally, when you finally do, whether it's in Jewish culture, want to take a Sabbath rest, whether it's meditation, whether it's you just want to have time to yourself without the children, you finally get this time, 25 minutes, a half hour, an hour, just to yourself, and your brain can't stop. It literally can't stop. And it's because you have been inundated with technology and being on the go that there's just so many things that are constantly trying to get our attention today that we wonder why we struggle trying to think of like, where did that thought come from? Or like, how come I can't just unwind? And so you've got books telling us you need to unwind, you need to carve out time for yourself. And it's like, I get that, but I don't know how to do it. And I think a lot of it is just kind of what we're allowing in between our ears, in front of our eyes all day long that we don't realize is sabotaging our ability that when we need to rest, we can't turn off what we've been inundated with. And I don't know if any of that resonates with you, if that's been your experiencing dealing with businesses, but just the last letter I think you said was self-discipline, like how to be focused, how to be so self-disciplined. And I think that's a struggle for many people because if I only have so much time, do I do this thing? Do I do that thing? Or do I do that thing? And rather than doing anything, we're so overwhelmed that, okay, I guess I'll just go on and watch reels because I don't know what to do. And, like you said, it feels like you're doing something, but I just don't know if like in your journey and your experience, has that been something that has cropped up, which is just the inability for people to know what the right choice is or to make a decision at all?
Well, I think you really hit it on the head in describing the many choices we have, but it's worse than that. It's the many irrelevant choices we have.
Hmm.
I read that there are, I think it's 36 varieties of ragu spaghetti sauce. So I walk in and I want to buy spaghetti sauce, and I've got 36 choices. How do I make a decision? And does it really matter? Am I happier because I have 36 choices? Or would I be happier if I had 4 choices or 3 choices? So I wouldn't have to spend so much time agonizing. I wouldn't suffer the FOMO of feeling that whatever I choose, I'm missing out on something better. You talk about boredom. Boredom is the clash of ambition and laziness. We want to accomplish, but we don't want to invest the energy necessary to be accomplished. And phones fill that void perfectly. I don't have to do the hard work. But at the same time, I'm not accomplishing something. I'm just distracting myself from being unaccomplished. Ultimately, it goes to this immediate gratification. We want it now. There's a constant battle going on in our heads between the frontal lobe and the amygdala. And this is what I talk about in my ethical decision-making talks, that the frontal lobe is looking ahead. What's the goal? What's the vision? What's the purpose? What's the plan? And the amygdala is saying, I want it now. And there is no way to eliminate that tension. It's always there. There's a reason in my acronym why self-discipline's at the end, because it means go back to the beginning and start over again. I think that I've developed myself. Great. Let's take it to the next level. Let's work harder to raise the bar. Let's engage that humility to say, What I've done is good. What's next? Where do I go from here? How do I build on the past? Because that's how we fight off this predisposition to looking for easy answers, to looking for shortcuts. You don't have to read books anymore. They're all digested for you. You can get the main points of a book in a 5 or an 8 or a 10-minute recording. You don't have to develop yourself because everything is there for you. I mean, you look at the people who are truly great, whether it's in history, whether it's in writing, whether it's in sports. It's the people who had relentless discipline to practice and practice and practice and get by that 10,000 hour rule we've all heard about. Well, if it's going to be 10,000 hours, there is no shortcut to 10,000 hours. You have to do 10,000 hours until you get there. And, you asked about my story. When I got to Israel and I made a decision that this is where I wanted to invest my time, I had not learned the Hebrew alphabet as a child. I never had a bar mitzvah ceremony. I knew nothing. I knew I was Jewish, and that was it. And I literally had to start from scratch. I wasn't even at square one. And it was grueling. You get 24 years old, your mind is not geared to learn language and to start with the basics. You want to jump right in. You want to get to the deep ideas, the thoughts, but you've got to learn the fundamentals. And I had to stick with it and plug away and put in the effort. And I didn't enjoy it particularly. It was very, very challenging for me. I mean, here I was, I graduated, I learned great literature on the college level, and now I'm going back like a kid in kindergarten. It was tough, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I had that opportunity, and I'm grateful that I found somewhere, somehow, the resolve to stick with it. Because now I have access to reservoirs of wisdom that would have remained inaccessible to me. And because I started off in a very secular background, I have a talent to be able to articulate those values in the language that people who don't share the reference points can appreciate and understand. That's what I want to bring to people, whether their personal lives or their business lives. There is wisdom out there that we can make relevant to us, and we can apply in our lives, and we can be happier and more successful in our relationships, in our work, in our communities, and everything we do.
Well, I think you just touched on two things that, again, I'm just speaking from my own thoughts, but dealing with people my age and conversations over dinner or, friends that you connect with over coffee. I think time is so hard to appreciate because when you're a parent at this stage, it feels like there's not enough time. It's going too fast. And you want things to happen sooner, like you discussed. But even in the story that you just shared, going back to the basics to build a foundation, I think is a very hard step for most people because they don't know how to do that when it just seems like life is sprinting full speed ahead. Like, how can I possibly go backwards and start over, sell my home, start a new career, take on a job, do a new thing? And maybe it's because of that tension that you talked about that exists in our minds. And I think what's hard is that we want to convince ourselves that once I have dealt with something, a train of thought, a mood, an emotion, once I've dealt with something, I shouldn't have to deal with it again. And so I think what happens is what you just acknowledge is that tension always will exist. It's two sides of a coin. Is when you're faced with that tension again, you can feel defeated because you thought you dealt with it. You thought you were, free from the addiction to sugar. You thought you were now developing a healthy lifestyle. You thought you were now able to say no all the time to certain things that you know are not your best, whether that be food, relationships, situations. I've dealt with that. I'm into this thing. I'm a couple weeks in. I'm doing better. I know a lot of people that are in a program called Celebrate Recovery, which is dealing with alcoholism addiction. And you can get to a point where you receive these chips, which acknowledge the amount of time you've been sober. And so you tell yourself, I've done it. And then all of a sudden that tension comes, that desire to want it now, to want something, to get a quick fix. And I think that's the part of the mental health that we don't talk about. We want to champion, raise your hand if you're struggling. Okay, I'm struggling. Oh, care so much, mental health. Oh, just take time for yourself. And it's like, okay, I get it. I think it's when you're trying to live a life of discipline and you've begun to take steps in the right direction and you've begun to say no to things that aren't serving you well and you begin to make progress. And then all of a sudden that tension that you talked about exists because time is the thing behind us that is constantly making us feel like I don't have time to deal with this. So you're dealing with this tension of I thought I overcame this. I told myself I was never going to scream at my kids again. I told myself I was going to be a better husband or a better wife. I told my kids I was going to be I was going to start showing up to work early and leaving late and doing all these things. And then the tension exists when you have to choose again. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown for a lot of us emotionally and mentally comes from, which is I thought I made a choice, but it's a series of decisions every day. And that's why in, Jewish tradition and in roots and it talks about, King David talked about in the Psalms that you have to encourage your soul sometimes. When it talked about the idea of muttering, of chewing and swallowing on the Old Testament over and over again all day long. And I think it's hard for us to culturally understand references today. But when you understand when these words were written and what that meant, you have to recall to memory over and over again the things that you're honestly probably trying to convince yourself are true, because there's hope, there's belief in it. But it doesn't mean that, you could start off with the greatest of intentions at 9 a.m., that you are going to start living a righteous life and taking care of people and serving others. And then you're self-seeking, self-absorbed, self shows up at noon and you're dealt with attention. Like, I thought I was over this. And I think that's the part that people don't talk about, because it's just the extremes. You're either so depressed and so self-deprecating that you want everybody to recognize you, or you're so friggin' successful that you're making so much money and you're an influencer and everything you touch is gold, that there's no in between. There's no ability to raise your hand and say, I'm trying. And I think that's where a lot of people are trying to be put into different camps that they don't feel like they belong in, because they don't identify with either side. They're in the thick of it, trying to figure it out, being inundated with so much information every single day of their life, seeing images that on Twitter you never should be seeing with your eyes that fast, of what was happening in Israel and Palestine. Like, how do you digest that when you're trying to have breakfast with your children and you're seeing people be killed on your phone? That's what causes you to be like, what is happening? Like, how do I deal with this myself? And I think we don't talk about, long-winded answer, the tension that you just described, that every day is there. And it's that tension that can make us feel like we're failing, or like, I thought I dealt with this. And I don't know if there is, in your world, in your experience, antidotes. I don't know if there's mental exercises. I don't know if there's things that you actively teach that can help somebody maybe deal with the struggle of the tension that exists in their life.
There's a Jewish teaching that says every person should carry two notes. In one pocket, the note says, "The whole universe was created for me." In the other pocket, the note says, "I'm nothing but dust and ashes." Because on the one hand, we are all important. We're all created in God's image. We're all part of the plan. We all have a purpose for which we were specifically designed and placed. We have a mission, and we're important, and the world needs us. And on the other hand, We need that humility. We need to know that the world's going to go on with or without us, because there's a bigger plan that we're supposed to be part of, but our refusal to participate the way we're intended to is not going to disrupt the plan for the world. I can't stop up the works because I refuse to do my part. And the tension is shifting constantly. You go through the 5 books of Moses, especially the last 4, and you see that the Jews, they're making mistake after mistake after mistake. There's the golden calf, and there's the sin of the spies, and there are rebellions, and there's complaining. And I mean, it's and the bottom line is we learn more from errors than we do from successes, which is why Scripture tends to focus on the negative. But how could they get it so wrong? They've just been taken out of Egypt for freedom. They just heard God reveal Himself. They're on a holy mission. How could they get it wrong so many times? Well, they pulled out the wrong note at the wrong time. When they needed humility, they pulled out the note that says, "Oh, everything's created for me." When they needed to believe in themselves, they pulled out the humility. That is the tension. And the sages have a teaching that I just come back to again and again. We learned that every human being has what we call an evil inclination. It's like the old cartoon of the devil sitting on one shoulder and then the angel sitting on the other. And when we get to the end of our lives, every person is going to be shown his or her evil inclination. And a person who's righteous and virtuous through life is going to see a mountain and wonder, how did I ever climb that mountain? And the person who did not follow the paths of virtue and righteousness is going to see a little smudge on the ground, a little bump on the ground, and think, how could I not get over that? And the explanation is absolutely fascinating and compelling, that every time we have to make a decision, there's a certain amount of resistance. There's some pushback to doing the right thing. And we respond in one of 2 ways. Either we rally and we push past that resistance, or we don't. If we rally and push past the resistance, we get stronger. So the next time that resistance has to be stronger as well to preserve our free will. You go to the gym, the first time you're lifting 5-pound weights, you're barely moving on the treadmill with no tension, with no resistance. And over time, you use heavier weights. You turn up the resistance on the treadmill because that's how you get a workout. And what's the point of the workout? To get stronger. And so to meet those challenges, to push past that resistance, we become stronger, which means the resistance goes up. Do that day after day, moment after moment, choice after choice, and you climb a mountain, and you don't even know you're climbing it because it's just one step at a time. But if you give in, if you let resistance stop you, well, the resistance doesn't have to get any stronger next time because you gave in at this level. And if you keep giving in again and again and again, you just stay right where you are. At the end of your life, you see, how come I couldn't get over that? You could have, but you never took the first step. That, by
And
the
you
way,
weren't,
is the Jewish concept of hell. Getting to the end of our lives and seeing everything we could have accomplished, but didn't because we couldn't find the inner strength and resolution to take those steps.
yeah. Well, and I even just have the visual of the end of Schindler's List, when he says, what could I have done? I could have done more.
Yeah.
And I know I've always talked about that I have this eternal view of legacy in trying to see, the Bible talks about and the Old Testament talks about generations upon generations. I think it's very hard for us in 2024 now to think about multiple generations because we make it to today. And I think it's very hard for people to think about the way that they're raising their kids, and their kids will have kids and their kids will have kids, and so on and so forth. And something my wife and I talk about, which is hard to do, is think about the long-term legacy of the life that we are living as parents right now. And how can we take the parts of our parents that we loved and maybe the parts of our parents that we wish were different, and become the best versions of the parents that we think we need to be. Because for us, we have 4 children. So just mathematically, if we train 4 children the way that we believe they should be trained, and they marry 4 like-minded spouses and they have children, the multiplication effect. One of the things that I had read is, I think it was Jonathan Edwards, that they looked back on his life in the generations, and from his lineage, he had so many presidents, so many attorneys, so many doctors. And when I'm sure Jonathan Edwards, who wasn't inundated with social media, probably when the lights went out and you had to use candles and electricity wasn't a thing, probably could not have imagined the small decisions that he was making every single day, what that would be leading towards, which was generations that would be known from his bloodline for him and his wife and the decisions they made. And I think that is maybe where the challenge is today is, 40 years ago, your measuring stick was probably the magazine covers at the checkout line at the grocery store. When you saw the Daily Wire and USA Today, and you saw the beautiful people on the covers, maybe in the 80s and 90s picked up one of those magazines and saw a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone or a beautiful actress and looked at your own body, looked at the picture, and that was your measuring stick. Or maybe it was the nightly news. Every night at 5 or 6 o'clock or at 11 o'clock, you would hear a story that would make you realize you're a part of this larger story, right? The world is bigger than you. So you'd watch the nightly news, or you'd have a publication, and then you had the rise of the internet and you got more access to things that were happening. And then no one could have imagined that with the cell phones, we would all have these small computers in our pockets every single day that would give you unlimited access to a world with one click of a button. And so now you are here with technology that's only going faster, being inundated every single day with images and videos and things that, like you talked about, like you can convince yourself that the things you're watching are benefiting you, but it could just be holding you back from becoming the person that you need to be. And so, like, learning how to taper technology, but I feel like there's a desire for people to not want to look back at the end of this thing and say, I could have done more. I think it's challenging when you are around people your age, or you're in communities and you're at the ball field. And I'm not saying that there's shallow conversation or shallow relationship, but you can begin to feel very alone when your desire is to want to be more. Though I love that idea of the 2 papers, because that is something that I don't want to say struggle with, but I think about a lot, which is, I believe I was made on purpose for a purpose, as well as every listener of this show. But I also understand my life is going to be here today and gone tomorrow. And so it's living in that space. Like, what do I do with that? Like, what do I do with this realization that my life matters and it doesn't at the same time? Like, how can I go? And this is kind of what JC and I talked about, and why I'm super excited that he referred you to this show, is just civility, getting back to the idea of taking care of other people, holding the door, calling people, not just texting them, calling them, reaching out, recognizing somebody in the public square is struggling, and not being so concerned about where you need to go and what you need to do. And I'm not talking about, being willy-nilly with your time, but being so understanding that you could lead breakthrough to that person's life by just acknowledging the fact that they just want to feel seen, appreciated, and respected. And so I love what you just shared, because if we can all get a small piece of that our life matters, that we're important because we were created on purpose. But at the end of the day, we're here today and gone tomorrow. And yes, a podcast will live on and TED Talks will live on, and you could go back and watch us and listen to the 2 of us guys on this call. But life has to be so much more. And that's my constant quest, which is not to beat myself up saying, what more can I do? But almost like a call to arms. Like, what else could I be doing to change one life at a time? And I don't, I just want to give you the space, because I know this is I think we're similar in many of the ways of what we're desiring, but just from a practical standpoint, is there anything that you would encourage somebody or share with somebody who maybe feels stuck in that tension as to what they can do to begin to work through some of their thoughts and kind of where they come from?
Yeah, it's actually a teaching of the sages that says it's not incumbent upon you to finish the job, but neither are you free to withdraw from it.
Well,
So, what is the job? The job is fulfilling 100% of my potential in a way that benefits the world.
hmm,
Well, how many of us are going to do that? Very, very few. Because if I lose focus for one moment, there's just one bit of potential. It's gone. I can't get it back. And this is what it means. God doesn't expect us to be perfect. He created us as physical beings, or let's say spiritual beings confined in a physical reality. And we have that tension, we have that struggle. The reality is, most of us are not going to come anywhere near to fulfilling our potential. So, as a reassurance, you're not expected to accomplish 100% of what you were put on this earth to be able to accomplish. But at the same time, neither are you free to withdraw from it. Because right now, in this moment, I have 100% of my potential time left to make use of. And I can make, I can make excuses, and I do because I'm human. But excuses are not, there's a difference between explanations and excuses. Say I'm a human being, I have shortcomings, I have failings. Fine, that's reality. But to set my sights to accomplish as much as I can, what am I going to do with the future? What am I going to do with the time I have left? You talked about um, feeling remorse over the past. Um, a rabbi that was very influential in my life, he said the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake.
hmm,
If I made a mistake, okay, I can take responsibility. I can try to fix it. Most important, I can take measures and develop a strategy to try not to repeat it. If I am a mistake, that's out of my hands. Nothing I can do. And to recognize no one in this world is a mistake. You're not a mistake. You have challenges. We all have challenges. Some people's challenges are more evident than others. Some people's challenges are hidden. Go read Edwin Arlington Robinson's poem Richard Cory. You remember that one? Richard Cory is, everybody looks at him. He was wealthy. He was refined. Everybody admired him. Everybody adored him. Everybody wanted to be like him. And then he went home one night and put a bullet in his head. We look at people, we think they live charmed lives. We have no clue. And sometimes, maybe most times, we are actually happier when we're struggling towards something meaningful. I actually had this conversation with JC on my podcast. I said that purpose is the key to happiness. We in society, people conflate pleasure with happiness. Ice cream does not make you happy. Ice cream distracts you, gives you pleasure. Sometimes you need pleasure. We all need those little boosts. It's not a source of happiness. It's working towards the fulfillment of a purpose. So JC argued with me. He said, "No, because you could be working towards the wrong purpose." He said, connection is the source of happiness. And I said, we're just finding two different ways to say the same thing. Because when I'm living a life of purpose, meaningful purpose, real purpose, I'm connected to the ideal, the goal, the outcome. I'm connected to the process of getting there, and I'm connected to all the people who are part of the same or similar missions, who can support each other. And it goes back to that idea of connection, community. there's so many different ways of looking at truth, so many different articulations. And you mentioned earlier that binary way of thinking. I mean, I talk about this all the time. It's a deeply dangerous enemy of ethics is to look at the world in a black and white way, because most of the decisions in life are not black and white. Most of the challenges are gray. And that's why I call my book and my podcast Grappling with the Gray. That's what we do. We try to see things from different angles, come up with as complete a picture as possible. Then we are in the best position we can be to make the best possible decision.
I love that. I'm going to give you time, Yonasan, to start thinking about your start, stop, continues. We kind of bring what I think could be a 3-4 hour conversation kind of to a close, because we want to make sure our listeners have some time to digest. But I think, we're about to enter, we're in one, but really revving up a political season where it's going to be inundated with slander and news stories and, people trying to tell people what they need to believe and how they need to vote. And I think it's confusing for a lot of people because there's a lot of labels thrown around. And, there's always layers to life. I believe that, for somebody like JC who gave up so much serving in the military to fight for the freedom that we have, that we should use our right to vote, that we should get out and, have convictions. But just because you vote doesn't mean that there's not a role that you don't play. And I love what you just shared, is that we can't withdraw from what we know we should do. And if you missed it, that's okay. There's grace. You move on. If you missed an opportunity, what I mean by that is if you missed an opportunity to be the best neighbor, to be the best friend, to be the best brother or sister or your parents, and you just drop the ball, there's grace for that, right? It's one thing to have convictions and to want to get out and vote and feel like you did your part, but then you don't forget every day that there's people in front of you that you can determine what you want government to look like, what you want this country to look like, and that is all true. But there's a part that you play every single day with the people that God puts in front of you that might need exactly what Yonasan needs or what Steve needs. And what I've discovered in my life is that we can spend a lot of time being frustrated, being inundated with emotions, responsibilities, that it can blind us to the needs of others that are right in front of us. What has been my biggest area of breakthrough in my life is when I can give what I don't even have for myself, or maybe something I don't even believe for myself. If I can give that away to somebody else, if I need encouragement, then go give encouragement away. Because there is a lie that if I just think harder about what I don't have or what I need, or why don't people see me or understand what I'm going through, that we can become so self-indulged that we make it about us. But if I need encouragement, then my radar goes off for people that I come across that might be struggling. That what I have found in my life is when I give away the thing that I need the most, I in return get filled up. And it's a hard lesson to learn, but I've found that just by giving people the things that they need, that is what's going to change one life at a time. So I know that there's so much. We might have to have you back as a repeat guest too. We will put information in the show notes because I think this conversation is different from other ones where, it's one thing to talk about leadership or life hacks or ways to do things. But I think really understanding a life of ethics with kind of that acronym that you gave is inspirational, because we all see the world however we see it, through experiences, through ways we were raised, through our parents, through just things we've been through. You can't ever take away walking in somebody else's shoes or what they've experienced that, gives them a worldview of how people are or whatever. But introducing ethics, I think, provides a framework for the fact that, like you said, you get to the end, to the S, to the self-discipline, and you got to go back to the beginning and start all over. Just because you got to start back over doesn't mean you failed. It just means that there's opportunities to get better, to improve for the next time around. So for those that are new to the One Big Thing, I do take some time here at the end with each one of my guests to do a segment that I call Start, Stop, Continue. You can talk about anything I just said, because I'm not trying to leave you with a cliffhanger. So if Yonasan, you want to talk about that, you can. But in the start, stop, continue, I have each one of my guests say a statement of something they want to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. And so I want to give you the space here to kind of close out our episode with any final thoughts and then just jump right into start, stop, continue.
I think my start and my stop are two sides of the same coin. I'm like a lot of creative people. I love writing, I love speaking, I love teaching, I love engaging people, and I don't like doing the hard work that positions me to be able to do more of that. So I want to start prioritizing better. And really what we're talking about, take my own advice and be more visionary. What steps, what fundamentals are necessary for me to be able to make more of the talents that I have, to be able to reach more people, help more people, let other people benefit from my over 40 years of scholarship and journey and insight, because that's what we're here for. We're here to serve. We're here to help others, and stop making excuses for avoiding the things I need to do that will ultimately serve my mission better, because in the short run, they're not gratifying. And at the same time, to continue to recognize that I'm not responsible for the outcome. I think this is something that is a message we all need to remind ourselves constantly in a world that has become so outcome based. I've been involved in social media, and I have seen my engagement shift radically whenever the platforms change the algorithms. I'm getting tens of thousands of views, and all of a sudden I'm getting hundreds of views. It's demoralizing.
Yeah.
Here I felt like I'm having this tremendous influence, this tremendous impact on people, and some change that no one can understand or predict or adapt to seems to undercut my efforts. That has nothing to do with me. I can go hire experts or try to figure out, okay, this is what the algorithm wants. I'm not interested in what the algorithm wants. I'm interested in the message that I am put in this world to communicate. And those who receive the message are the ones who are meant to receive the message, and they will value it. So, the hardest part for some of us is to take our own advice.
Yeah.
To have the conviction, to give ourselves grace. That's part of the tension, that's part of the struggle. And carry on.
Well, and I love what you just shared at the end, because I feel like you talked about storytelling was a foundational piece of your life and kind of what pushed you, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, however long ago, storytelling. It would be overwhelming if when you went to go tell a story, somebody said, hold on, the lighting is not right. Hold on, we need better graphics. Hold on, you need some lo-fi music in the background. No, you just tell a story, because good stories move the human heart.
And keep
And
it to
I
4
think that's,
minutes because nobody has patience.
yeah, I think that was one of my own challenges here in 2024, which is don't get caught up in how the algorithms work and trying to be an algorithm. Just be the authentic you. Create content that you would want to listen to. That if you got a chance to be inspired by a Yonasan Goldson, just let that story tell itself. Don't worry about how it's cut, how it's edited, what it's said, because the algorithm could change again. But if it's about impacting one life with one good story, then it's job accomplished. So, Yonasan, I hope that you felt honored and appreciated as a guest of the One Big Thing. For those of you that have come on to champion you, again, I hope that this is not your last stop of the show, because I do try to find guests from all walks of life, and I think we can all learn from each other. But I just want to thank JC, but also just yourself for being really open, being honest, being transparent, but also just sharing some deep wisdom that if you got anything from this, you were created on purpose for a purpose. and you could change the world. But you also have to realize that life is fleeting and it can come and go and no one's going to remember you. So living in that space and that tension every single day of go do something with it, but recognize what it's all about. If we can all figure a little bit of that out in this life, I think we can change a whole lot of people's lives. So Yonasan, thank you for being a guest on the show.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for inviting me.